I have talked before about Supertram, and in South Yorkshire, Supertram is now back under public ownership. And I think this is a big opportunity for Supertram to really expand its network, to really finally fulfill its promise. For example, to get a line going not only into Rotherham but into Doncaster. I know technically there is one, but it's tram train. But it would be good to finally get that proper tram line into Rotherham, going into Doncaster, going into Barnsley, maybe even going from Barnsley to Doncaster, having a east-west tram line that would connect a lot of communities and improve transport for a lot of people. However, building it is, of course, one part, doing it is another. And as the people of Leeds will tell you, even now there is a brand new consultation about a potential route for a Leeds tram. They will tell you this has happened before. It's been going on for decades. Will it finally happen this time? Quite frankly, for the Leeds and the people who live there, I really do hope so. I think getting a Leeds tram would be a massive boon for the city. I don't understand why time and time again it has been put off. Mostly, of course, has been the cost. However, I came across this article today by a group called Create Streets, and they are all about improving, better streets, having better public high streets. Part of this, I think, is a good, interesting case study because they looked at a town in France where they have brought back their trams and done it in quite a good way that we could once again replicate here. And I've said this before: if a policy or something works in Europe or elsewhere in the world, why not just go copy paste? There you go, UK, crack on. Of course, we'll see if that happens. But I am a really big true believer in sort of Supertram. Not only that, bear in mind, we are, of course, seeing buses being talked about being brought back into sort of public ownership now as well. Oliver Coppard ran on that as well. He's starting a public consultation for that to happen as well about bus routes, what people want to see from their, bus network now that it's back under public ownership. So again, good steps forward on public transport, quite frankly, in South Yorkshire all around. However, the tram, I think, is something very, very much so that does need to be really, really looked at in this case. So before we go on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link, where you can, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So, cheaper and better trams. So, Create Streets and the Campaign for Better Transport are now together launching a new forum, the Tram Network, which will now support more cities to try and create tram lines and work together with the government and industry to now reduce the cost. In this blog, Create Streets' Robert Kolick brings us some lessons from France and how to build better, cheaper trams. So, I think that is a great idea that you've got this group saying, hey, we want to see trams across the world because, as we'll see in a moment, we are missing out. Trams have been brought back into a lot of places where, if you look back in old film footage, everywhere used to have trams or tram trolleys all over the place. And then we got rid of them inexplicably. And then we sort of maybe brought them back. Like I say, you've had Sheffield, again, prime example, they got a tram. Edinburgh got a tram. Nottingham, of course, got a tram as well. And I think roughly that's sort of it, really, the areas that got a tram. Maybe I'm missing out at a couple of other places. But where you've had these places that have got tram networks, I can only really sort of speak to Sheffield on this. It has proved to be very, very good and very, very popular and has expanded over the years. And I think, again, it should expand even more. But anyway, back to this also. I'll get on my high horse about that again. Anyway, back to this. So trams are, of course, currently experiencing a renaissance around the world. Yet Britain's trams are now unaffordable. That seems to be, of course, the prevailing belief in council chambers and the corridors of Whitehall, partly because We have a very bad habit in this country of gold plating our infrastructure and an attempt to now reinvent the wheel on a project by project basis to a degree which makes them unaffordable and causes the cost to skyrocket. Excessive tunneling for HS2 is, of course, one example. As a result, infrastructure projects either don't get off the drawing board or, even worse, are just merely seen as a pipe dream, and trams tend to fall into this category. The French, of course, take a completely different approach, a more flexible approach, opting for what they can afford rather than what may be the absolute best option. It makes for, of course, better connected towns and cities and stronger local economies. And I think, bear in mind, not only the way that France do this, but there's a lot of stuff in Europe, the way that they approach um, things like this. And I just don't understand why have we not adopted like some of that way of thinking. It pains me to the nth degree, but there you go. A prime example of this is the Besancon Tram, which was built for around half the cost of similar projects at a time by opting for simple, proven designs to minimize the complexity and keep the costs down. Bracon is, of course, a small eastern city in eastern France with a population of 120,000, or about 280,000 in the metro area, equivalent to at least the size of Lincoln and its surrounding area. The historical capital of at least watchmaking in France, and today is, of course, a center for industries such as microtechnology, micromechanics, and biomedical engineering. It is also the greenest city in France. The beautiful city center is characteristically French limestone buildings and has now a UNESCO World Heritage Fortress overlooking the city. The city, of course, did originally have trams, as did most other French cities in France and, of course, in England at one point. But these were then replaced by buses in the 1950s. Inevitably, the bus network got stretched to capacity, so the city now embarked on a tram project in the early 2000s. The new tram was approved in 2008, construction began in 2010, and then construction was completed in 2014, and the service launched that same year 8 months ahead of schedule. Yes, you read that correctly, ahead of schedule. And bear in mind, it is emphasizing that point. Most of these types of infrastructure projects are delivered on schedule. It is incredibly rare for something to go ahead of schedule. So, to be honest, they got it 8 months ahead of schedule by just focusing on tried and tested designs, knowing what's work, going for what they can afford. Yeah, hey, if it works, if it works, don't fix it. So the project cost 254 million euros for 14.5 kilometers, or about 17.5 million euros per kilometer. That is nearly half the cost of the other trams at the time. Despite, of course, the relatively modest cost, it is still a modern low floor tram, which can travel up to speeds of 70 miles per hour. In comparison, the new tram in Tours at 14.3 kilometers, about that very same length as Bascon's, was inaugurated just a year before and ended up costing 433 million euros. The difference in this cost is, of course, because Tours had an architectural distinctive stations and the trams and the users of Atom's expensive now third rail AP system in order to avoid overhead wires in the historical core. But how did Bascon keep the cost down? And this is where we can start to learn from some stuff here. So, first point, wherever possible, it used simple standard designs that were proven to work elsewhere. Again, don't have to reinvent the wheel. If something works, we can just bring it in. The entire system had overhead wires, as the wireless technologies at the time, such as batteries and powered rails, or even supercapacitors, would have just been more expensive. So, hey, if we have to use overhead wires, then we use overhead wires. It keeps the cost down. If standardization of station design now worked across the network, again, why not do that? Most of the super tram stations in Sheffield, raised platform with a covered roof. That's it. You just roll that out across, make it standards. It used basic short 23-meter trams from the Spanish manufacturer CAF to start, though the extendable ones now with additional sections. 7 companies bid for the rolling stock contract rather than the usual 3. Again, open the bidding, make sure that, where you've got, this is a thing across government, you're going to have 3 options. Why be stuck with 3 options when there might be multiple companies who have some good idea? Should we not be considering more companies? If their idea is good, why should we have to whittle it down to 3? I think that is something that is, fundamental flaw in Whitehall, that we've got to narrow all these things down to 3 choices. I think it locks out other ideas that could be just as good, and then, of course, don't end up in a decision process. But that's, again, another story about our, bad choices that, sometimes, and the thinking that can go on in government. To avoid, of course, costly street designs and to maintain reliability and to ensure safety, cars were banned from the streets and the tram runs along. And, of course, elsewhere, there is now strict segregation. In France, utility companies now bear the cost of moving and upgrading their assets. This resulted in now far fewer utilities being moved unnecessarily. The design and operation facts. There are currently 31 stations and the primary one on one line, at least, plus now several small branch lines. They also chose the standard gauge to allowing the possibility of operating a tram train substructure service, of course, in the future. That's what we've seen on Supertram. That's why Supertram can get to Rotherham, because of the tram train stuff. In most locations, the track does sit on the stone paving, particularly in the city centre, where glass tracks are, of course, common in suburban areas. The public was involved in the selection and design of the country wire poles and the colour of the trams. The tram operates at least 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. every 5 minutes during peak hours, down to 40 minutes on Sunday. The tram proved very successful. It is used about 40,000 passengers per day and, of course, works in tandem with the city's bus networks to alleviate the capacity issues. A few years ago, the city brought out longer trams from Alstom. This sourced now to a joint bid with Toulouse and even Brest, again, to now save costs. So if you want to learn more about the Besançon tram, there's an excellent video I do recommend with some great shots of the tram in operation. Again, I think that is very, very good. Very, very good indeed. Does show, again, how it can be done. If France can do it, and cheaply as well, basically, use the money you've got, use the systems you've got, go ahead with it that way. What's, the problem in using it? If you can do it that way, great, go for it. So, as always, let me know what you think. Are you a Leeds resident, maybe pining for the trams, or are you less optimistic? Because, well, we've both seen it before, right? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And, of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.